Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. So I will be coloring a new to me picket fence studio stamp. This is it's called Rose stamp. And I am coloring it orange because at our home in Oregon, we had some beautiful orange roses. And so that's why I picked orange. I will be stamping it in Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink onto a piece of Nina Solar White Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock because that paper is good for Copic markers and the ink is good for Copic markers. I did have to stamp it twice because it is a brand new out of the package stamp. I still got I heat set it with my heat tool, kind of dry it. I still got a little bit of smearing, but nothing too big. Once I am done coloring, I will be doing some fussy cutting, and there is a card sketch I'm going to be using to assemble the card. I will also stamp it a second time or third time after I'm done coloring it to bring back in those dark, bold black lines. I'm using a 5-color blend today, the darkest being an E19 color to get those darkest, deepest shadows, and the lightest being a YR02. At the end, I will also add in some darker shadows and some Wink of Stella glitter on top of the rose. And I think that's all about the coloring. So let's hop into our crime. Today, our alphabetical journey takes us to the state of Rhode Island. The area of Rhode Island was part of the original territory of the United States. An original patent was granted for the Providence plantations in 1643, and a charter was granted for the colony of Rhode Island and Providence plantations in 1663. Rhode Island ratified the Constitution on May 29, 1790, and it was the 13th of the original colonies to join the Union. The official name of the state is State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. In addition to having an unusual name, Rhode Island is also the smallest state in the Union, and they never ratified the 18th Amendment prohibiting the sale and drinking of alcohol. Judge Darius Baker was the first one to impose a jail sentence for speeding in an automobile in Rhode Island. Polo was played for the first time in the United States near Newport. Rhode Island was also home to the first National Lawn Tennis Championship, which is the precursor to the U.S. Open. Rhode Island was the home to the first golf tournament. Rhode Island has no county government. It is divided into 39 municipalities, and each municipality has its own government. Rhode Island is home to the Flying Horse Carousel, the oldest carousel in the nation. It is also home of the first circus in the United States. The songs I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy and You're a Grand Old Flag were written by George M. Cohen, who was a resident of Rhode Island. And Rhode Islanders were the first to take military action against England by sinking one of her ships in the bay located between Newport and Providence. The area known as the Industrial Revolution, words are hard, started in Rhode Island with the development and construction of water-powered cotton mills. The first British troops sent from England to squash the revolution landed in Newport. Little Compton is home to the gravesite of the first girl born to colonists in New England. She was the daughter of Pilgrims John and Priscilla Alden. The White Horse Tavern was built in 1673 and is the oldest operating tavern in the United States. Since 1785, Bristol, Rhode Island has had the longest-running unbroken series of 4th of July Independence Day observances in the country. The Truro Synagogue is the oldest synagogue in North America, having been built in 1763, and is home to the oldest Torah in North America. The first African-American regiment to fight for America made a gallant stand against the British in the Battle of Rhode Island. The first torpedo boat was built in Bristol, Rhode Island. Pelham Street in Newport was the first street in the country to use gas-illuminated streetlights. And before you get tired from listening to me talk and fall asleep, Rhode Island is also home to one foul deed. I am not going to get too far into the background of our cast of characters today because there was quite a few main characters. So we're just going to start with a man named Thomas Dorr. Thomas was born on November 5th, 1805 in Providence, Rhode Island, to Sullivan and Lydia Dorr. His father was a prosperous manufacturer and co-owner of Vernon Mill Village. Thomas's family occupied a good social position, and he had at least one sister named Susan. Now, one source said he had siblings, but I could only find a family tree that listed that one sister. As a boy, Thomas attended Phillips Exeter Academy, and then after graduating from Harvard College in 1823, he went to oh my goodness, words are hard. He went to New York City and studied law. After he finished his studies, he was admitted to the bar in 1827 and returned to Providence to practice. Thomas never married. The next family we're going to talk about is the Sprague family. Amasa Sprague was born to William and Anne Sprague on October 10th of 1798 in Cranston, Rhode Island. He had one older brother, William Jr. Amasa began his career working with his father in the cotton mills. William's father owned many businesses, and as he expanded the businesses, Amasa assisted his father in purchasing raw materials and then selling their finished product. After their father's death, Amasa and his brother William Jr. founded another company, the A&W Sprague Company, and they continued in the cotton and calico business. Amasa was the senior partner and superintendent of the print works, while William Jr. went into politics and was eventually elected to represent Cranston in the Rhode Island House of Representatives. He even went on to serve in the U.S. Senate, or the U.S. House. Third family is the Gordon family. Nicholas, William, and John were brothers that had immigrated from Ireland to Rhode Island. In spite of the fact that this case is politically linked, outrageous, and just a bit extra, there's very little known about the Gordon family. The only birthday I could find was John's, and it is vague. It says Ireland, about 1815. Now let me set the stage just a little bit. Rhode Island was actually founded by Roger Williams. Roger was actually exiled to Rhode Island after demonstrating his radical beliefs on religious freedom to the settlers of Massachusetts. Roger openly invited all races and religions to live in peace in Rhode Island, and he aimed for peace among all people, including peace with the Native Americans. Some believe, and Thomas Jefferson was actually cited as saying, that his ideals are the inspiration for our Bill of Rights. Thomas Dorr began his political career when he was elected as a representative in the Rhode Island General Assembly in 1834. But he was becoming more and more concerned about the way voters were selected, and this idea was labeled the franchise. So the way that voters in Rhode Island were selected was that you had to be male and white, and you had to own property. But not just any amount of property. You had to own a substantial amount of real estate. And at this time, that limited the voters to about a third of the population of Rhode Island. By 1841, most other states had voted to adopt universal suffrage for white males, meaning any white man could vote. Rhode Island had not. So Thomas started a movement based on the language of the Declaration of Independence, asserting that power belongs to all people. In 1841, the Dorrites, Thomas's followers, drafted a new constitution called the People's Construction. And for real, the first time I saw that Dorrites, I thought it said Doritos. Okay, anyway. The People's Construction included a Bill of Rights, and it granted voting privileges to all white males. And it was put to a vote, and it was overwhelmingly ratified when all white males were allowed to vote. However, the wealthy, land-owning Whigs and Democrats formed the Law and Order Party and had the newly voted upon Constitution declared illegal by the state Supreme Court. Anticipating this, the Dorrites had already set up a rival government, and based on the new Constitution, with Thomas Dorr as their governor. However, they attempted to capture the state arsenal in Providence, and they were soundly defeated, and Thomas had to flee the state. When he eventually returned, he was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. And it seems like all of his work might have been for naught, except that. Just put a pin in that thought, except that. And that's not even all that was happening in the 1800s. Rhode Island was becoming home to many Irish immigrants, and that was creating this hatred between the wealthy English and the poor Irish immigrants. The Irish immigrants were coming and they were working in the state's textile mills. The new workers were essential to the mills, and the mills were essential to Rhode Island's economy, but a lot of the more wealthy established people's families did not consider the Irish immigrants to be equal. And it is no surprise then that the Irish immigrants overwhelmingly supported the Dorr Rebellion, as it became to be known. Now, Amasa Sprague was a member of, guess which party? The ruling class, of course, and together with his brother William, who by 1844 was a U.S. senator, they owned textile businesses, including the ones they inherited from their father. They owned several cotton mills in Rhode Island, but their most profitable factory was the print works in Spraguesville, which printed the calico patterns on cloth. That was the fabric that all of the women wanted to make their dresses with, right? Calico. It was like the pattern, the print, the fabric for women's clothing. The A&W Sprague Company employed most of the residents of the town now called Spraguesville, and they owned all the tenements that they rented out to their employees, and they owned the store where their employees shopped. And Amasa was actively opposed to the Dorrites and was instrumental in Thomas's arrest upon his return to the state. Fast forward to December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1843. Michael Costello, a Sprague's servant, found Amasa shot and beaten on the road between his factory and his mansion, and there was blood everywhere. When Amasa's body was found shot and beaten, the murder was first thought to be a political assassination by Thomas's followers. But since the arrest of Thomas, the Dorrites had been in a state of disarray. The wealthy mill owner certainly had many enemies. He was an imposing man from a wealthy family who didn't really seem to care for the hundreds of migrant men, women, and children that he employed. But who would have the rage and the courage to kill him? There were a few theories. One was that a man named Big Peter Dolan had killed Amasa. See, Peter Dolan had been fired just the week before for busting up a loom where his nephew's fingers were ripped off. I would bust up that loom too. I'm just saying. Eventually, however, suspicion fell on 3 members of the Spraguesville Irish community. Can you guess which ones? Nicholas, John, and William Gordon. Now, Nicholas Gordon was known to have a grudge against Amasa Sprague. There was no love lost between these 2 men. And it was believed that John and William would do whatever their older brother wanted because he was responsible for getting them out of Ireland and into the United States. You see, Nicholas Gordon had come from Ireland in the mid-1830s with enough capital to open a general store. And he opened this general store about a mile from the print works factory owned by Amasa, and it was profitable. By 1843, he had earned enough money to build an addition on his house and send for the rest of his family. At that time, he brought over his mother, his 3 brothers, John, William, and Robert, his sister, Margaret, and William's 7-year-old daughter. Now, the reason for success, or one of the reasons for the success of Nicholas's store, was a special license he obtained in 1840 that allowed him to sell bottled liquor. And then, in 1842, he was granted an alehouse license that allowed him to sell drinks by the glass. These licenses were required to be renewed every 3 months, and he had no trouble getting this license renewed until the summer of 1843, when the town council, under the influence of Amasa and William, denied his request. Amasa used his influence to convince the Cranston City Council to suspend Nicholas's liquor license. It seems that Amasa was unhappy about his employees getting drunk during working hours, and he blamed that on Nicholas's store. So this was the beginning of the animosity between Amasa and Nicholas, and it was the reason that Nicholas and his brothers were suspected of Amasa's murder. Now, examination of that body, Amasa's body, showed that he had been shot in the wrist, which is weird, and then hit on the head twice, fracturing his skull. Either of those blows could have killed him. The following day, a town meeting was held, excluding those without property, and vigilance committees were formed in several of the school districts, and they were to investigate. Additionally, the Sprague family offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of the murderer. Nicholas and John were arrested at the house, and the house and store were searched. No gun was found, but it was public knowledge that Nicholas owned a gun. Other members of the Gordon family were arrested, including the 2 other brothers, the mother, a friend named Michael O'Brien, and they also arrested Nicholas's dog. They arrested his dog because there were dog tracks found near the body. Apparently, Nicholas's dog wore a dog collar of jagged metal, and there were some who thought that dog collar could have contributed to some of Amasa's wounds. Tracks in the snow near the murder scene led to a swamp where a coat and a broken gun were found. The gun was identified as belonging to Nicholas, and the coat had a hole in the elbow. A shirt found in the Gordon home had a bloody stain on the elbow corresponding to the hole in the coat. According to the Providence Journal newspaper, quote, 2 men were seen going toward the fatal spot shortly before the murder. 2 men were seen to emerge from the swamp on the other side after the deed had been committed, one of them without his coat, end quote. Nicholas, John, and William were held for the murder of Amasa Sprague. The rest of them, including the dog, were released. The trial of John and William was taken very seriously. There would be 4 presiding judges, all members of the Rhode Island Supreme Court. The Irish Catholic community rallied behind the Gordon family and raised a substantial amount of money for their defense. Thomas Carpenter was the leader of the defense team, and he had actually been an ardent supporter of Thomas Dore's suffrage movement. William Sprague resigned his Senate seat to oversee the prosecution. Can you say conflict of interest much? In the courtroom, the prosecution team would be led by Rhode Island Attorney General Joseph Blake, a leader of the Law and Order Party. I feel like the battle lines have been drawn in this case, and there's not going to be a good ending here. John and William were tried together, Nicholas, the alleged ringleader, would be tried separately. Nicholas would be the central figure in John and William's trial. So John and William had only been in the country about 6 months and, according to prosecution, would have had no reason to murder Amasa except for the bad blood between him and their brother Nicholas. And prosecutors were allowed considerable leeway in establishing this conspiracy. They were allowed to include testimony of alleged threats made by Nicholas to Amasa. One observer noted, quote, "The decision that threats made by another person in the presence of an accused prisoner are admissible as tending to prove a motive on the latter's part without actual proof of conspiracy or effective response stands unique in the annals of American trials." End quote. Basically, this observer was saying that by the judges allowing the prosecution to say that the defense had made threats against the victim without calling any witnesses to the stand was unusual and unique. And just so you know, this decision by these judges has not ever been used as a precedent in a later trial. It's called hearsay. You can't say, "I heard him say." The man who said it has to be there. Anyway, the prosecution proved that Nicholas did own a rifle, and it was now missing. John had been seen holding the rifle. The coat was identified as belonging to Nicholas, but had been being used as the dog's bed. And at some time in the past 6 months, John had been seen wearing the coat. The trial lasted 9 days. Not bad, right? The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 15 minutes before returning their verdicts. John Gordon, guilty. William Gordon, not guilty. When the verdict was read, John Gordon turned to his brother and said, "It is you, William, that have hung me." Little bit on the, what the heck is all that about? I'll get there, I promise I'll get there. On October 13th of 1845, Nicholas's trial began. So this is nearly a year since the death. Remember, it was New Year's Eve when Amasa was killed. So this is now October of the next year. He had been the focal point of his brother's trial, and his trial went much the same way, except that instead of his threats being used against him the way they were against John and William, John's conviction was used against Nicholas. Nicholas's trial also lasted 9 days, but it ended in a hung jury. 8 for conviction, 4 for acquittal. I don't even get that. Nicholas was the guy who hated the guy, supposedly. Don't even get that. Anyway, before Nicholas's second trial and just prior to John's scheduled execution, William Gordon revealed the reason that Nicholas's rifle was missing. When William had first learned of Amasa's murder, he hid the rifle and a pistol owned by Nicholas under the floorboards of the attic of their home. He thought that it would keep suspicion away from Nicholas, but in fact, hiding the weapons had the opposite effect. So John learned what his brother had done during the trial, and that is why he said, "It is you that has hung me." And regardless of this new information, John was hanged. He was hanged February 14th of 1845. Nicholas's second trial began April 7th. So they hung John before Nicholas's second trial even took place. The defense did not use the information about the hidden guns because that would have meant putting William on the stand, and they were unsure how he would stand up to cross-examination. So instead, they attacked the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, who were now not quite as sure of their stories as they had been 6 months ago. The result was about the same, a hung jury. This time 3 for conviction, 9 for acquittal. Nicholas Gordon did not have a third trial. So the verdicts were John Gordon guilty of murder and executed, William Gordon not guilty. Nicholas Gordon hung jury both times. Now, John's execution was not public, but there were over 60 official witnesses to the hanging in the yard of the state prison in Providence. Over 1,000 people had gathered at the prison, trying to stand on a hill and see in, but the fence was too tall. John Gordon's last words were, quote, "I hope all good Christians will pray for me." Then the Reverend John Brady, a Catholic priest, shocked the elite observers by saying to John before the hanging, quote, "Have courage, John. You are going to appear before a just and merciful judge. You are going to join myriads of your countrymen who, like you, are sacrificed to the shrine of bigotry and prejudice." I think that preacher kind of put some people in their place. I'm just saying. More than 1,400 Irishmen joined the funeral procession to the North Burial Ground in Providence. Many of them had come from Massachusetts and Connecticut in protest of the injustice of this execution. And instead of following a direct route from the prison to the cemetery, they instead turned down Benefit Street, where the, what's the word I'm looking for? Procession, there we go, would have to pass the State House and several of the aristocratic homes. Nicholas Gordon was released on bail, but lived under constant threat of another trial, and he died deeply in debt on October 22, 1846. William Gordon was sentenced to debtor's prison in June of 1850. John Gordon was the last person executed by the state of Rhode Island. His conviction and execution have been called by researchers anti-Roman Catholic and anti-Irish immigrant acts. In 2011, a resolution requesting the posthumous pardon of John Gordon was passed by the Rhode Island Senate and House of Representatives. So, on June 29, 2011, the then governor granted the pardon, and the ceremony was held in the same room that John Gordon had been tried and convicted in. The real killers of Amasa Sprague have never been found. One of the sources I used for this story is a Murderpedia link, and it's in the description box down below. And one of the things in this write-up was some old papers by one of the judges on the Gordon trial. So there is a woman named Christine King, and she inherited a bunch of papers from her grandfather. Her grandfather was a dairy farmer named George, who purchased the house that was once owned by Judge Durfee. So after her grandfather's death, Christine started looking at the papers, and she didn't really think much about them until she started looking at them closer. They are written by hand. They're his handwritten papers, and his handwriting was a bit cryptic. So she consulted a man named Scott Malloy, who is a student of Rhode Island history. And they realized that these Durfee papers would have some major historical significance because he was one of the justices involved in not only the Gordon trial, but 3 other of the most contentious trials in the 19th century Rhode Island. So his notes are in his own handwriting, and there's nothing in there that would jump out and say, yes, he did it, or no, he didn't. However, Judge Durfee was the judge who gave instructions to the jury on a couple of important things. One, he told them how to interpret testimony and conversations during the deliberations. So that whole letting them say, he threatened him without having witnesses overhear that, he allowed that. Also, it is written in one of the papers, it says, quote, Durfee said, quote, he told the jurors to give greater weight to Yankee witnesses than Irish witnesses. The proceedings were riddled with prejudice against newly arrived Irish Catholics. Durfee held up almost all of the objections raised by the prosecution while overruling most defense challenges. So in addition to this being a hot mess because they allowed inadmissible hearsay evidence, one of the sitting judges instructed the jury badly about what they could or could not allow. He told them, he allowed the hearsay evidence. He allowed these supposed threats Nicholas made against Amasa without any witnesses. And then he told the jury that a Yankee testimony was worth more than an Irish witness testimony. Holy cow. That is crazy, and it is no wonder that John Gordon was given a pardon. Unfortunately, it took, a really long time to get there, and nobody looked for anybody else. They settled on Nicholas, and that was it. Guess what? I have pictures. This is John Dorr. He's a dapper-looking gentleman. A little bit of a upper crust kind of guy, but he's not bad looking, right? The next picture, this is Amasa Sprague. Also, not a bad-looking young man. Or say young man, not a bad-looking gentleman. The next picture is a picture of William Sprague. Guess who I found 0 pictures of? No pictures of the Gordon family. None at all. None. There's a picture of the Sprague mansion. And John was, killed just down the street from here. There was one picture I found. One picture of Nicholas Gordon's home. This home is no longer in existence. It has been torn down, but this is a picture of his home. I am undone. I hope you enjoyed the story. I have a couple other videos here I think you would like. I've also added a subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you did. Leave me a comment down below. What are you thinking about this story? Give me a thumbs up and have a really fabulous day.